This podcast represents the opinions of our hosts and their guests only. The content here should not be taken as medical advice and is for informational purposes only. And because each person is so unique, please consult your healthcare professional for any medical questions. Welcome to Once Shattered, Picking Up the Pieces, a podcast devoted to changing the way eating disorders and mental illness are viewed in our society. With your hosts, Jack and Linda Major and Ellen Bennett. Today's guest is author Julie Fingersh. Julie Fingersh is a writer, freelance journalist, and most recently, the author of Stay, A Story of Family, Love, and Other Traumas, Rowman and Littlefield, which was named one of the best memoirs of 2024 by People Magazine and called Rich, Wise, Funny, and Hard to Put Down by New York Times bestselling author Anne Lamott. Julie's personal essays, editorials, and reported stories have appeared in the New York Times, Oprah Magazine, the San Francisco Chronicle, the Huffington Post, and more. Her Substack newsletter, Take My Advice, I'm Not Using It, is a midlife sequel of an award-winning humorist column she wrote in her 20s for Billboard Publications. Julie has 2 adult children and lives with her husband in Marin County, California, and New Haven, Connecticut.
Welcome, listeners. We are so glad that you are with us here today. The podcast is brought to you by our nonprofit organizations, the Emily Connection and KMB for Answers. I'd like to welcome my wonderful husband, Jack Major, and our dear friend, Ellen Bennett, is not feeling well today, so she's not able to be with us, but we will be asking her questions for her, so she will be with us in spirit.
Yeah, our color person is a little under the weather today, so we will miss her. And she's here, yeah, like Liz said, she's here in spirit. So welcome, everyone, and so glad you are back with us. Remember, the links for Julie Fingersh and her beautiful memoir, Stay, A Story of Family, Love, and Other Traumas, are in the show notes, and I have to recommend this book highly. As I just told Julie, I read the book in 2 days, and it was hard to put down, so wonderful book.
So let me start with my quote for today, and it is, starting the conversations about mental health with your family is the first step towards breaking the stigma and finding support. I found this online, and there was no credit given to who said it, but I'm using it because I think it works pretty well for this podcast. What do you think, Jack?
Yeah, I mean, that's, one of the reasons we're doing what we do here with this, our podcast and everything else, is to stop the shame and the stigma, because it
doesn't help anything.
It makes things worse. Families need to understand mental illnesses.
Yes, all mental health conditions. Yeah. So without further ado, I am honored to welcome Julie Fingersh. She is amazing. Her book is beautifully written and embraces the complex dance of parenting adult children and the secret life of mental and chronic illnesses for individuals, siblings, and families. Julie, thank you so much for joining us today.
Welcome,
I am
Julie.
honored to be here. Thank you for having me.
So, Julie, the memoir is beautiful. Congratulations on making People Magazine's list of best books of October 24. And actually, I think you're also one of the best books of the year for People Magazine. Can you share a little bit about your early childhood and your relationship with your brother and when you first knew you wanted to become a writer? That's a loaded question. Sorry. There's a lot of questions there.
Well, Danny was I feel like he still is my younger brother. And there were 3 in our family, 3 kids. And my older brother is 3 years older than me and 6 years older than Danny was. And so we were, and he was always out with his, friends and he was the cool one. So Danny and I were kind of partners at a time when, there was no social media and there was just it was back in that magical time where you actually had to make your own fun. So we just were very, very close, and our childhood was idyllic. It was our parents are wonderful, loving people, and so anyway, we just that was sort of the background for the story, and I think the message behind it really was that, as I say in my preface, like things like this didn't happen to people like us, and I say that ironically because they do, and so I think our family story is an example of that. And about when I wanted to become a writer, I think, I think when you're young, people tell you what you're good at, and then you just figure that's what you're supposed to be doing. And for me, I think it was something that, it's not that it ever came easy. It still doesn't come easily to me, but it's just something I was praised for at a young age. And so it was just sort of, and I'm such a not math science person. It was sort of the thing I felt like I was good at, the one thing. And I still feel that way in terms of, profession wise. So I was young. I mean, I grade school and then high school, I was involved in the newspaper. And then so the other backdrop of the story was that idea of just really wanting to be a writer and thinking I was going to be a writer, and sort of imagining that, like, this whole life ahead of me. And then I just woke up 30 years later when our kids were about to leave the nest and was like, oh, wow, I just left that whole part of my life behind, and I didn't really understand why. So I think this book came from wanting to understand what had happened to the trajectory of my life. And I never intended to write a book. I'm not one of these, I'm a journalist that was the kind of writer I always wanted to be. So and memoir would be the last thing I would ever write, because it's self-focused, and that's not my nature. So, but it was just an exercise of trying to reconnect with being a writer, after many, many years of not, and mostly just trying to write my way through a situation that I couldn't understand.
And there's something very cathartic about writing a memoir, and especially when tragic things have happened in your life. Mm-hmm. And it's also hard to be that transparent. But your book will reach, and already has reached, so many people, and so many people will be able to relate to it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. As I was reading it, there was so many pages that I put those little sticky, Linda said, oh my God, there's these little yellow sticky things sticking out of all the pages. And it was just so many that related, that we could relate to, and other people, I'm sure, too. So
thank you.
And in one of the pages was when you talked about your community had no idea what was going on with Danny, because your parents wanted to preserve his privacy so people wouldn't judge him. And when somebody has a physical illness, like your daughter had, people can empathize with that person and the family, even though they may not have been, touched by that illness, that disease. Yet mental illnesses have such a shame and stigma attached to them, and families have to power through them on their own sometimes. And it took so much courage for you to write this book, and it will help families know that they're not alone. So since the book has come out, have people reached out to you and opened up about their struggles with their families and mental illnesses?
So many people. I think, first of all, it's interesting. Like, a lot of people say, commend me for the courage it took to write it, and which I appreciate, but I have to say it didn't feel like it took courage to write it, because I think, well, like I said before, I wasn't really planning on publishing a book. I was doing it for myself. I was really doing it as an exercise. And then what happened was, I think the thing that really took courage was the first time I spoke about Danny publicly, which was at I live in Northern California, and it was for our high holiday services for Yom Kippur. And our rabbi, I'm part of the committee that organizes that service, and we do, part of it is to do personal stories. And I had been writing the book for a while, and that in that moment, I knew I had an opportunity to share the story of what was happening. And it was kind of like a practice for me to see what it felt like to be public about it. And so on services that year, I got up and spoke. And I want to just point out that it's on my website, that talk. And I would encourage your listeners to listen to that, because even if they don't, if they don't get to the book, it's about 5 minutes. And I recommend it because that was sort of the epiphany I had. And that was this moment where, like, I came out as a whole person in a community I'd lived in 25 years. No one had, a couple, maybe my very closest friends knew what happened to Danny. And it was so powerful because after that talk, and anytime someone speaks about mental illness, I know that they say this, that so many people came to me privately, mostly privately later, who I've known forever, just saying that, telling me their stories. And I think that was the moment. I think if there was courage, it was then. And once I saw what an impact 5 minutes had on so many people in a room, I thought it almost was like, it wasn't even courage. I just felt like this just needs to be done and this is something I can do. And I didn't write this book to save anybody else, but I think it's clear that it is really helping a lot of people. So now I'm forgetting the original question because
no, that's okay. He had asked about
other families, reaching out.
But so and they have, and it's been astonishing to me the number of people who just define. Now with social media, anybody can reach out to you, but the more striking thing is how many people in my life who I've lived with and thought I knew for so many years in the same way they thought they knew me. And to imagine that most people live a double life on some level, and it's just, what's the double part, So that's
we should
amazing.
Probably tell, you should probably share with the listeners at this point what it was that Danny struggled with.
Oh, yeah. So it was a depression. I think it was just really an intractable depression that I think came on when he was 13 or 14, and we thought was just growing up, and he had switched schools. We'd gone from a very kind of protected environment at like a small private school to a larger private school that was kind of it was not a very hospitable place on some levels. And he had a hard time there, and it just sort of started to kind of deepen. And it took many years for us to even understand that that's what meant, because back then this was in the 80s. Nobody, there was no language for it. And we didn't know anybody who had, had real issues. And so that's what it was. So the book really tells the story. It's 3 stories. It's my brother's story and how it unfolded. And then, and my kind of my role, it's told from the perspective of me as as a sister and as a young person. And then it kind of goes back and forth between that and me and my present life on the at verge of an empty nest in my 50s, and or actually on the kind of eve of my 50th birthday and that whole 50th year. And then it connects with our daughter, who was just leaving for college and who became, out of the blue, much like Danny, had a very beautiful, blessed life of ease. And she was diagnosed right in the first week of college with ulcerative colitis, which is a bowel disease, which is very unpredictable and serious, and has a range of very terrible symptoms. And then that's sort of the connection between those three things: my story, my brother's story, and our daughter's story, and just the connection between our past as people and how it shapes our future. And but also just the stories of how we learn to love without losing ourselves, which is a really tough road for most people.
Yeah, I remember, and I was going to bring the book today, but we loaned it to somebody else the other day to have them read it. But you talked about, like you said, your daughter was just sailing along, happy, peer, friends, and just. And I just related that with Emily, and I'm sure so many people out there that relate to that. Well, they never worrying about a thing, and then bam,
something hits you. It could be mental or physical,
or
psychological. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I have the next question is from Ellen. And she says, your description of your experience as a sibling with a brother who struggled with severe mental illness is so powerful, and so is your daughter's journey as well.
Yeah.
As you unravel the pieces as an adult, it becomes clear how you, the sibling, became overshadowed by all that was happening. In essence, your world shattered. Tell us more about this statement, saving Danny became the focus. And then I'm sure later, trying to save your daughter too became the focus later. And what is the significance of the book titled Stay?
So, the thing that I think it's so interesting to hear, this is one of the things, I guess, about writing a book, which I didn't anticipate, is how people just take it in a way that you don't expect. And it's true, I guess, to hear the words overshadowed, I guess it is true. But what's interesting about it, and I think what's universal, is that when someone we love so much becomes ill, we don't even necessarily see it as, I don't think I was conscious of being overshadowed. It was just it was the most important thing that was going on in my life, I mean, I was not sailing, because as anyone, it's, okay, I can go on so many tangents, but my nature is, struggle and humor and, living very intensely. So life was never sailing was never part of my life, I would say. But I think that it was our life, like I said, it was idyllic on a lot of levels. And I think what happens when you're in a family is whoever is having the hardest time becomes the immediate focus in a family who loves each other. So it just, at the time, it was like I was in high school and I was just really headed for the stars much in the same way as our daughter was at the time that she got sick. And then Danny began to struggle, and I think this happens with siblings, which, by the way, I really think siblinghood is one of the most under-attended to, underappreciated relationships in our life. I think if you have siblings, they are profound. Your placement in the family, how you're shaped by those roles. And if you don't have them, being an only child also changes everything. But in any case, so that's really was the experience. And I think he became the focus because it just didn't seem like the things that I was focused on in my life, my college and what I was going to do afterwards, like my little writing life, like who cared? My brother was struggling to function. And then the same thing happened when our daughter became sick, that it just, especially now I was a parent, and that's like, we all know that we're only as happy as our child, our most unhappy child. Mm-hmm. It's very hard for that to not be true. So anyway, but I think that the difference was, since I had been through it with Danny, and I saw that no matter what I did, I mean, in the end, I couldn't save him. I mean, I could help him and I could love him, and I did. I think I brought that into what happened with our daughter. And so I had a lot more humility when our daughter got sick, and understood that it was beyond me. Like I couldn't, there was going to be no way for me to take over. It's all I could do really was love her and be there with her on the journey, which is, when you have a child or a sibling or someone who you love, I mean, ultimately that's the thing that we can do. And then in terms of the book, the title, it's not to be coy, but the word stay means something for me. And it's like a very profound word to me. And it's a relationship about where, like, the presence in our life and who we're with and who we stay with and all the ways we're pulled. But I don't have a pat answer for that, because that title is my title. I can't, I was really lucky to be able to choose my own. And it just like sort of came to me as the really the underpinning of the book. But I've noticed that it really means something different to different people. And so I really, like, I don't want to put a pat answer on it. I would challenge, if you read the book and the word comes up in the book, and over time you will, I mean, I'd be curious to know, you as readers, if it's something that resonated, that if it's meant to resonate with you, it will resonate with you. Mm-hmm. Your relationship to that word, stay.
And it's a commitment too. It's a choice and a commitment that you make out of love. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
I remember.
And it's also a relationship with yourself.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I remember in the book you and your husband talking about how, as all parents, it's our job to protect our child, and what happened to your daughter. It wasn't your fault, it wasn't her fault, but you just always, when something like that happens, you feel like, what should I have done, or what could I have done?
The powerlessness.
Mm-hmm. But it's the powerlessness, yeah.
Right. But we should say that her daughter is okay.
Yeah,
She's
absolutely.
doing okay, right?
It's true. No, it's just such a powerlessness of it.
Okay, so in your book, when Danny was struggling and at a treatment center, you, being the loving sister that you were, put together a collage of photos of him during happier times. And you gave them to him when you went to visit, to remind him of who he was, who he really was. Later, you regretted it. Can you tell us more about that? I think it's not unusual to want to remind people when they're struggling with a psychiatric illness that, you don't remember who you were. But
Right.
tell us a little bit about, because I think a lot of people can relate to that, and it might help people going forward.
Yeah, it was one of my many attempts to figure out like how to. It's in retrospect, such a naive thing to think that would have been helpful to, maybe wake him up and remind him of the way he used to be. And I think the lesson was that it turns out that doesn't help, because it just makes him feel worse, because he was where he was, and he couldn't reach that person he had been at that moment. And so I just think, to me, the lesson, it was really one of the first lessons of how important it is to just be there and not try to fix, because we just can't. And I think that that was just like a spectacular failure, because as loving as it was, it was incredibly painful for him to look at these pictures of himself as a happy child and to feel so distant from that,
I think
so.
When people go through difficult times like that, you're not the same person afterwards. You're never the same person that you were.
Exactly.
But I think you can grow to be an even better person if you can get through the challenge.
Right.
But yeah, in the throes of it, it's really difficult. And it's so hard to know the right things to say or do. But just being there and listening is powerful and cathartic.
It is.
And it's hope.
Yeah.
It's hope that for the person that, okay, they still love me.
Yeah, somebody cares. Yeah, somebody still cares.
Right. And that no matter, how much they struggle. And, I think, with Emily, I think that anorexia is the same kind of disease where it's from the perspective of a person who doesn't have it. It seems so reachable to just, all you got to do is
eat.
Or like, you have everything. Why aren't you?
Yeah.
It's just, that's, especially when you're on the other side of it and you're there and you're seeing how much they have to offer and how loved they are and how everyone thinks the world of them. It doesn't, you think that that's going to help. You can't cheerlead someone out of anorexia or mental illness. You can't cheerlead them. And I think that's so hard to stand by and watch a disease that you don't see. It's fighting an enemy that you can't see and that you don't understand.
And the powerlessness,
and the powerlessness, and from the perspective of a person who's, your parents, or like I was at the time, who's relatively well, we just can't understand what is in their minds.
Well, and when we started this podcast, I said to Jack, I want to do this, and I don't want it just to be about anorexia, because there's so many...
Or eating disorders in general.
In general, right. I want it to be about eating disorders and all mental illnesses, because there's so many common threads through them all.
There are.
Yeah.
It is. And I think there are so many common threads in the lessons of being a loved one who is standing by. But anorexia is in eating disorders is a really it's so similar in that it doesn't make sense on some level to a person who doesn't have it. It's not logical.
So many people, well, in particular, they'd say, Emily's got it all. She's a doctor of pharmacy. She's got a great job. She's got it. She's
friends and
friends and everything. And then people would say to us, you were a good good family, good parents that lived in Penfield. How could this happen?
That's exactly.
Yeah. And let me just tell you, Penfield is just a regular town.
Yeah, right. Yeah, but that's why we say this can happen to anybody, any family.
It doesn't. Yeah, and I think that the thing about the stigma issue, it's so interesting because now that I'm on the other side of my privacy, like the sort of like the need to hold that in and close and protected, what I really realize is that it's just kind of an illusion. I mean, we're the ones who give it the power to be a stigma, because it turns out, as I'm sure you know doing your podcast, that so many millions of people struggle with the exact same thing. And ironically, the stigma and the silence just deepens the pain and isolation. Mm-hmm. And I mean, at the time, we didn't know better, but I can see with Danny, I can see that with Jessie, our daughter, she didn't really have the option. It would have been very hard to keep it a secret because she was literally started college, like hadn't even started. It was her orientation week and she was hospitalized the first week. And, what was she going to say? She had to say something to like her roommate and her professors who, she missed the first week of class. And we had that same, our kind of instinct was, we don't want people people don't need to know about this, But it was just clear that she didn't want to start school off with like a web of lies where like it's hard enough to start college and like at all. So she didn't, she did tell people what was going on. And it was just such a lesson of how actually just telling the truth in some ways is so much easier, because the people who can handle it are going to be there and the people who can't aren't. And it's kind of good. It's kind of good to know. I mean, she knew right off the bat who her friends were going to be.
Mm-hmm. And it comes down to capacity, and not everybody has the capacity to be able to hold that space for someone else. And thank goodness there are wonderful, compassionate people who do have that capacity.
Yeah, so that kind of leads into my next question here about, have some old friends and acquaintances stopped calling or stopped talking about Danny, stopped mentioning his name after he died? And if that is the case, do you understand where they're coming from?
Oh, I totally understand where they're coming from. And I think that, I think it's human nature to avoid difficult things. And I think particularly because we hadn't talked about his struggle all along, his death was such a shock to our community. They really had no idea what was going on. And so it made sense to kind of go back into into silence about it. People were uncomfortable. They didn't really know what had happened. And I just think we all kind of avoid, a child dying is such a horror. It's such a horrific thing. And I think people's instincts are, oh, I don't want to bring that up because that's going to upset you. But, as anyone knows who's been through anything like it, it's like you're already upset. And part of what makes it even worse is the elephant in the room. Yeah. Right? Yeah. And so I totally understand that impulse. But I think what I've really learned being on this side of it is that it means so much when people ask so tell me about, what was he like, or to share their stories or memories. it just means everything. And actually somebody who's really taught me so much is one of my writing partners, Sally McQuillan, who actually I'm going to tell you about later offline, because she'd be such a wonderful guest for you. She wrote a book called Reaching for Beautiful about her son, and who died, and who had struggled with addiction, but who was a amazing kid, just beloved. And I've learned a lot from her, because right from the get-go, she had events. They have memorials. They have a golf game for him. They have a bar crawl for him, where they get his friends together and really honor and invite people to share stories and memories. And you can see how healing it is for not just for Sally and her husband, Joey, and their other kids, but for the people who are there. Because, just like for your daughter, it's like there's a whole world of people who was part of their lives. And they are also grieving on some level and have nowhere to put that. Mm-hmm. So I understand that impulse to stay silent, but one of the things I think that I learned and really encourage people who are we all are faced with loss, and friends who have faced loss, and that it's always better for the person to say, hey, how is it going? And especially after time has passed, because the worst thing about losing someone is feeling like they've been forgotten.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. People figure, it's been 9 years now for us, and people figure after that amount of time,
it's not 9 years yet. It won't be.
It's coming up, right?
In August, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That you should be over it, but moved on. So
there's no over it.
No, there's no moving on.
There's no over it.
We're all moving forward, but
with them.
Right.
With them.
Right.
Yeah. Right.
So this is one of Ellen's questions, and so coming to terms with the impact of your experience with your brother impacted the rest of your life and took years for you to process. One line that struck me from the book was, I came to equate my ambition with guilt, with a kind of betrayal. The more success I had, the bigger I got in the world, the worse it would be for Danny. Can you explain or expound on that?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's probably true for anybody who is living alongside someone they love who's struggling. It's just, for me, it was just impossible to feel like my success wasn't hurting him in some way. Because it just, the contrast between us as siblings was just, the more, I was in college and I was a writer and I had a column, and, then I graduated and I got great jobs, and, it was just like the better I did, the greater the distance was for him of how much not that anybody was expecting him to do what I did or what my other brother did or whatever, but it's just kind of speaks to that idea of a double life. Like when you have a child who's struggling, like, is it, I say in the book, like I went on this writing retreat and which I had planned before any of this happened with our daughter. And I ended up, so I went because she was okay and she was at school, but it's really hard to be there being like, oh my God, here I am, starting my new chapter in midlife while my daughter's like struggling to like walk to class. So it's impossible, I think, to not feel that tension and to know what to do with it, because it just doesn't feel good I think it's the world we're living in right now. The parallel for me right now is, the book is reaching a lot of people, and people who I have like revered as writers. Anne Lamott called it funny and wise and rich, and she couldn't put it down. Like, she's one of my legends. You know, she's a writing legend to me.
Mm-hmm. She's wonderful.
And at the same time, the world is shattering right now for a lot of people in my life because of what's going on in the world. Mm-hmm. It's really hard to like hold the, you know, one's success when there are people in your life who are struggling so much. For especially, I think, as parents, it's really hard to know that, you know, to be happy without also feeling like on some level you're leaving the person who is barely functioning behind.
Yeah.
It's so hard.
It's so hard.
It's so hard.
Our therapist always told us to, you know, you got to do stuff for yourself. You know, you've got to
take care of yourself.
Take care of yourself and you know, go
but it
away.
Doesn't feel good.
And do that. And yeah, it was the guilty. Like, I'm going to go away and have a good time. And like, I couldn't have a good time anyway because my thoughts would always be back in Penfield.
Absolutely.
With Emily. So, again, it's easy to give advice but
it is
when you're not walking in that person's shoes.
But it was good advice, though. I mean, it was good advice. You don't necessarily have to go far, and it can be just going out to dinner or
but even
going to a movie. Sometimes just a little break. Sometimes is all that you need just to recharge. So
I remember going to a family dinner, and Linda and I just looked at each other across the table and said, "What are we doing here? What are we doing here tonight?"
Yeah.
You know.
You know, there's so many things looking back that you wish, you know, knowing what you know now, that you had done differently. And I don't think anybody goes through situations like this without having those thoughts. But that kind of leads into my next question. So, there's so much warmth and humor in your book. You talk about the voices in your head, and you are referring to the voices we all have in our heads. The voices that tell us we are not good enough, that we didn't do something right, what we should have done different, and on and on and on. And I love that you call these annoying voices that you have in your head the committee.
Right.
And it is a committee because there's a lot of voices there. At the same time, Jack and I can relate to how challenging it can be to write a personal story and put yourself, so much of your life and your family's life out there. And you said you didn't always intend to write this book, but are you glad that you did? And are you surprised by its success?
Yes, totally. Totally. I mean, let's see. I am really happy I wrote this book, especially since it's done, because it was torture to write. But I'm glad. I feel like something was put to rest inside me for writing it. And then it also just is really reassuring just to see like how many different audience, like kinds of people are relating to it. I think one of the things, like maybe as you know from writing your book, that it's that you're supposed to kind of narrow it down to a certain, you know, 2-sentence log line is what they call it. And for me, this book is what was really cathartic at the time for me. And then I worked really hard to make it be a book that stood on its own for anybody. Was that there's just, it's a slice of life. And I think that's why people relate to it so much, because it speaks to people who live in families that have a member that has chronic or mental illness. It's about midlife, and it's about women and our struggle to figure out where we are in our own lives after our kids are gone. And it's about siblinghood and, you know, dogs and how magical and healing dogs are, and, you know, just family patterns. And it's really about everything. So I think because it has so many different audiences, that is really that's what that to me has been it has been most satisfying, is to just know that people, even though they don't know me, I'm not a celebrity, it's just they're finding something in it to help light their way, and think about things, and just also learn from our mistakes as a family, and for me as a person. And parenting adult children, I think, is one of the hardest things that is not talked about a lot. There's so much about young children and diapers and stages, and then like your kids grow up and there's not so many books anymore and not so much attention, and that's actually the hardest part in my view, because it's that dance that I talk about, that parent-child dance of like, the line between loving them and giving them agency and teaching them, letting them fail, which is really, really hard, and how much do you let them struggle before you intervene? So anyway, yeah, I've been surprised by this success, but also not surprised in a certain way, because I know that it speaks to a lot of people, just because it's a life, and we all have so much in common. And I think it's probably the humor that is probably, it's funny, that's the thing I get asked a lot. So I'm a columnist really by nature, like Irma Bombeck and Nora Ephron, like those are the people that I, kind of had always wanted to be like, in Anna Quinlan, and humor is, to me, like that's the thing that, it just is the thing that keeps you going, and it's a coping mechanism, but it's just also like you have to, I think, like it just helps to, it just lights the way, and it helps to give perspective. So I think that a lot of people ask about like, how is it that it's so funny when it's so tragic? And to me, I feel like the people who've been through a lot are often the funniest, because they've had to be.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think my next question was about the dance that you talked about in the book, and how to help a child between when they're going childhood to adulthood, and I think some children, as they're struggling, try to protect their parents. Especially as adults,
Yeah.
they're trying to protect their parents, and then they feel bad about what they're happening to the parents. But as parents, it's our job to protect them, no matter how old they are. So,
Right.
Can you just say what you'd say to other parents struggling with the dance?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's, gosh, I wish I had a straight answer for it, because I still struggle with it. But I think it's recognizing, I say this, I think, in the book, that it's like understanding your own intentions and where they come from. Because I think one of the big lessons for me that I share just by example in the book is realizing that, with Danny, what we learned was that no matter what, we couldn't save him. And I think that when our daughter became ill, it just, like, that lesson really helped inform the way we worked, the way we tried to live alongside her. And it was a constant struggle, because we're always looking for the solution to like the next medical trial, the next biologic, like maybe we need to change doctors. And I think it's to understand your intention, that like part of that need to take over and take control is from your own anxiety, and that it's to, and that there's also a very seductive part of it where, as a parent, like, we want to feel needed. We want to feel powerful. We want to feel like we can help our kids. And that to realize the link between that and between taking away their agency. Because I think our daughter, in that one scene at towards the end of the book, really, it was a very enlightening moment for me to realize that that she basically was like, Mom, this is my illness. Like you're not going to, you and Dad like constantly like looking and recommending and sending me the articles and the this and the that and the new diets that are going to help. It's just makes it feel like you're just not accepting what I have and what my life is. And I need to accept it and I need to learn how to manage it. And the more you kind of take over, one thing I say in the book that it was a very hard one lesson is the more we overfunction, the more they underfunction. And the more we underfunction, the more they learn independence.
That's very profound.
That's
very,
great.
very profound.
Yeah.
So Ellen has.
But it's hard to follow my own. P.S. Don't talk to my daughter because she would say, "Mom, you talk a great game, but you're still sending me the articles."
Well, autonomy and yep, your children are always very honest with you, and that's a good thing. So, and with us too, I think it's pretty universal. From Ellen, her last statement here is, "This book will help others," and that was intentional. It was intentionally and beautifully written. You are so real and honest. This resonated with me. Danny's part in Stay is for everyone struggling to help those plagued by mental illness and to light the way for those left behind if battles are lost. And she says, thank you. And I'm so sorry she couldn't be here. She's so disappointed she wasn't feeling well. And I would like to say, when we lose someone we love, it's always a complicated grief, and we will be forever processing it and missing them. Julie, I want to thank you for sharing your journey with us, telling us more about the book and the process that went into writing it, and for joining us today. Is there anything else you'd like to share with our audience? And please, all the links are in the show notes, but maybe you'd like to tell people yourself where they can find you.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, thank you so much for having me. And my heart breaks for you and your journey and Emily. And I hope that you take the opportunity on the anniversary of, her passing or birthdays or whatever to have your friends like share their memories of her with you. I think that for the people when the battles are lost, the best thing we can do for one another is to share those stories and memories and how their memories live on and how their impact lives on.
That's right. Keeps them alive.
No, go ahead.
It keeps them alive.
It keeps them alive. It absolutely keeps them alive. Yeah. I mean,
everything we're doing, from the book to the podcast to the Emily Connection, everything is. Our strength comes from her, and she's with us at every step of the way here.
Yeah, I have chills. I know that she is, and she was a beautiful girl.
And I'm sure your brother is so proud of you, and your daughter, I know, is so proud of you. And
no, I feel that. I really do. I really feel that. So where you can find me. So I have a website, and I'm sure you'll put it in the show notes, but it's juliefingersh.com, my crazy name, which I write about too. And also on that website, because I'm a journalist also, there's, this book is a very serious book, but really my writing is mostly, it's mixed. I think that's like kind of my thing, is just like, it's but humor is the main part of it. And it's like that makes like the reality of life go down easier, I guess. But anyway, that's where my articles and essays in the New York Times and Oprah and all those other places are. And then the other thing I wanted to say about where I am is I also write a newsletter on Substack, which is it's like a platform where people can go, and there's amazing writers on there. Mm-hmm. But if they my newsletter is called Take My Advice. I'm not using it. And so that's on there.
Beautiful.
That's on there too. And and just again, I wanted to encourage anybody who has a child or someone in their life who's struggling with mental illness to watch that talk that I did, because I believe that it's something that helped to make a lot of people think differently about the way they were kind of moving through helping their child, and like the cost of the secrecy of it, and the cost of keeping things so sealed up, of that isolation. So it's just, I just want to highlight that, because it's a lesson that the cost of it was very high for me personally. And I think that I really want people to hear that story. If they're keeping things private and living a double life like that, thinking they're protecting their loved ones, so that they really come to terms with why they are doing that and who it really is helping. Because a lot of times it's hurting not just them, but it's hurting the person they think they're trying to protect.
That's
So,
said.
yeah.
That's great.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, Julie, we can't thank you enough for being here with us today. And this has been
Yes.
a wonderful, these hours go so fast that we could continue.
Thank you so much. I hope that we stay in touch, and I hope you have another book. I hope you have another book in you too.
Oh, well, it's not going to be a memoir, that's for sure. But thank you both, and I just wish you both the best. And it's beautiful that you're doing this podcast. It's really holy work that you're doing in memory of your daughter, and I'm sure it's helping many people to offer people the opportunity to come on and share their stories. It's just like, it connects people, to be able to share these and know that we're all, we all have a common struggle, no matter what the reason is. So thank you both.
So true.
Thank you. Thank you, listeners, for listening. And now you know Julie Fingersh, and you know about her beautiful book, Stay. We extend our sincere gratitude to our listeners always, and to our special guest, Julie Fingersh. What an important conversation and wonderful book. We would also like to thank Rockfox Recording and Production, and Scott Fitzgerald, our remarkable sound engineer, for his exceptional production of our podcast and so much more. Please rate, review, share, and subscribe to this podcast, and check out our YouTube channel. Learn more about the Emily Connection and our book, Emily, the Story of a Girl and Her Family, Hijacked by Anorexia, available on Amazon.
And learn more about our co-host, who really is so sorry she couldn't be here today. Hope she's feeling better. And her nonprofit organization, K&B for Answers, and the great things that they are doing. The discussions we have with all our guests are so incredibly important, as they emphasize that importance of mental health for every one of us. And thank you again, listeners.